And if you talk to people who work in nonprofits, very often there's a huge amount of burnout, and a lot of the cultures are quite...
Welcome to the Startup FailWisdom Podcast, a podcast helping founders avoid burnout and build their startups with confidence by learning from real failures. I'm your host, Paul King, a fellow founder who's experienced the brutal challenges of startup life firsthand. Here we dive into the tough lessons that often go unspoken, real stories of failure, burnout, and recovery. In this podcast, we explore how founders turn their setbacks into fuel for future success, so you can navigate your journey with resilience and confidence. In today's episode, Wei Yeoh, a seasoned social entrepreneur, shares 3 key insights to guide your entrepreneurial journey. First, he discusses the mindset shift needed to make charities self-sustaining and empower communities. Then Wei reveals lessons from his own startup failures and how adapting quickly led to success. Finally, he explains how collaboration and diverse skills help build resilient teams. So stay tuned. This episode is packed with valuable insights from a leader who has been on the front lines of both the nonprofit and startup world. Welcome to the podcast, Wei.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate being here today.
You know, there's a saying, you've probably heard of it, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. Now, looking at your LinkedIn profile and looking at all the things that you've done, if I need something done, I'm definitely coming to you.
Sure. Is this like an airport pickup or something, or I'm all for it?
It is actually, yeah. I'll give you the details after the show. So you're doing so many things, and you've been a founder of so many organizations and doing wonderful things around the world. And also, I want you to talk about your book as well, Redundant Charities. Some would say it's controversial. I'd say it's very much needed, and totally agree with the principle of charity. So we'll get into that as well. But just tell us a bit about yourself and what you've been doing and what you're involved with and what you're currently doing.
Sure. So my story starts like many people's from many generations ago, because my great-grandparents migrated from China to Malaysia during a time of famine. And then my parents came from Malaysia to Sydney in the late 60s as students, mostly because being ethnically Chinese, it was difficult at the time for them to get a place in university because a lot of the policies favoured ethnic Malays. And so they came to Australia really for the opportunity to study, and then stayed on to have a better life for their children. I'm the youngest of 3 boys, grew up and was born in Australia. And I think growing up, I was just always really aware of the huge amount of privilege and good fortune that I've had to be born in this country of all places, and going to nice schools and having incredible healthcare. And it's on the back of all of that sacrifice, accompanied with the privilege, that I've realized that I've spent my whole life, I think, trying to work out ways in which we can help people better. So originally, I started looking into healthcare as a profession. The stereotypical thing, we're ethnically Chinese. Of course, we're going to look at medicine, and that's, the top ranking option. But I actually saw that my eldest brother went through exactly that and became not just a doctor, but also a surgeon, and realized that wasn't for me. And there's a bit of a long-running joke in my family, which is that when your eldest child in a Chinese family becomes not just a doctor, but a surgeon, the parents are kind of look at the other 2 kids and are like, all right, you guys can do whatever you like. We've made it. We've achieved everything we set out to achieve.
Such a cliche, but true in many cases, no?
Yeah, it's cliche for a reason, I guess. So I guess to my good fortune, my parents were pretty hands-off in terms of me choosing my own path. And it started off as physiotherapy. I thought I was going to be the physiotherapist for the Wallabies or some, other national sporting team. And I ended up mostly working in aged care. And I remember the day that I was working in Nepean Hospital out in Sydney's west.
Yep.
And I was walking an elderly lady who was in her 80s
Sally?
Down the corridor. Yeah. Yep. Sally, you remember the story. And I realized that, things hadn't really worked out the way that I expected them to. Yeah. It wasn't quite the glamorous physiotherapy career I had wanted, but also I wasn't very good.
So you're going to tell us what Sally whispered in your ear?
Sure. So I wasn't sure how PG rated this podcast
No,
was.
it's fine.
So Sally, this lovely, beautiful lady who had dementia, whispered in my ear for me to come closer because I'm observing her gait walking down the corridor and making sure she could walk safely. And she said, "Oh, come a bit closer, love." And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll come a little bit closer." And she goes, "Oh, come a bit closer." And I said, "Oh, I need to stand back a little bit so I can see how you're walking." And she said to me, "Oh, come on, love. If I was 40 years younger, you'd do me." Were her exact words, I think.
Right.
Now, of course, I was in my early 20s, so 40 years younger for Sally was still double my age. But the point remains that it wasn't exactly the glamorous career I thought I was going to have.
Yeah.
Being a therapist, being a physiotherapist, it really requires a lot of one-to-one skills, and that's not really me. And I have a huge amount of respect for people who can do that. And so then I went into the charity world, which I'm sure we'll get into, and I looked into how I can help many people with the work that we do.
Yeah.
And then the last thing was the book, Redundant Charities. And that's, I think, even on a bigger scale, because ideas can go well beyond thousands of people that a charity helps. And so hopefully through the book, I'm able to impact even more people.
Yeah, I'm hoping that becomes a movement because, you'll talk more about it later, but I do think it's important for charities to be redundant. And obviously you'll explain that later. It's not just, I think, as you said, just, looking at the symptoms and looking at the actual causes. And like your charity in Cambodia, for example, you ended up leaving that, being involved with it, but getting the Cambodian people to take over that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, working internationally, and I think it's a really particular example with charities because the power dynamic is so obvious that often the way that charities are set up, they don't necessarily put people who are in lower positions of power to be captains of their own destiny, captains of their own fate. It's very much us bestowing our goodwill and time on the behest of you. And I think that often doesn't result in good outcomes.
Yeah.
And it's beyond being unethical. So I think it is really important that people are put in positions of power so they can choose for themselves how they want to solve their own problems.
Yeah. I think I got a quote from you. So much of what we do in the international charity space is to justify our existence and our ego.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. When I'm approached by charities sometimes, as you do, like on the street or other things, I'm actually a bit like, no. I don't really want to talk to them because there's lots of stories about how some charities, like 90% of the money that goes in goes to admin, for example. I'd much rather, if I see someone on the street need help and they ask for money, I always say, look, can I buy, like you're hungry or whatever, I'll buy them something and give it to them directly, not even give them cash because you never know what they'll spend it on, but I'll buy them food or drink or something like that. I just feel because, like people are wary, like myself, of where that money is actually going.
Yeah, and I think the skepticism is warranted. And, there's a lot of skepticism around charities now in general, which harps back to why I think we need to have more critical discussion on what a successful charity is. If you talk to the average person who's working at a charity and say, ask them, what's your biggest problem and what it is that you want to achieve? 99% of them will say something along the lines of, we just need more money.
Yeah.
And that's a very simplistic view of the world. Give me more inputs to do my job. Why don't we start talking about how your job actually runs and what success looks like for you and your charity? And maybe there's a way through that discussion that we can actually help people more too.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And look, hopefully your book will, start that change to happen, start a bit of a movement, I'm hoping. And everything that you do, coming on podcasts, for example, hopefully can go towards helping with that. So just go back a bit and just tell us how you first got into, like the charity space. Like I think you were in Hanoi and then you had an experience there at a children's orphanage. So can you go back to that and then step us through your progress through to China, Cambodia, etc.?
Sure. So in this process that I talked about of giving up on my dream of being the glamorous physio and having Sally crack onto me in a Nepean hospital, I went to Asia, and I went traveling, and I did that cliche thing of trying to find myself in my mid-20s, and I ended up in this orphanage in Hoi An, actually in Vietnam, which is right in the center of the country. And what happened was a typhoon came through the town and lifted a roof off the orphanage, and the kids had to sleep on the classroom tables. And here I was at mid-20s, no child protection check, no social work background, no support, and really isolated and not really knowing what to do. And I think what I realized at the time was that good intentions were not enough. I was really in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so I came back to Australia and I studied international development at UNSW. And I also worked in a charity for the first time. And it was with that I got this job in China, which is my dream job, working for a big international charity, and then thinking that here I am on the path to working for the WHO or the UN. There's a bit of a theme here, you can tell in my career. I'm thinking that I'm going to do something that's high status potentially, or high and mighty, and it doesn't work out very well because I realized that a lot of it's just fake, I think. So when I worked
people justifying their own existence, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I found in China, was that I came into the 5th year of this 5-year program, and charities are very much about looking forward to the next funding cycle. As you said, Paul, justifying their own existence, justifying why they should get more funding. And my job really was to lie about how effective that previous 5 years had been, because there is this undercurrent of thinking within the charity sector that, oh, we're good people. Of course we deserve to get more money. We absolutely should do more. It's that, that mentality I mentioned before, just give us more resources. But the reality of this work in China was it wasn't effective and probably should have been shut down. And so I left China very, very disillusioned, and then I ended up in Cambodia next.
Right. So that is a major problem with a lot of charities, as we said. So you ended up in Cambodia, and so what happened there?
Yeah, well, Cambodia was just me trying to find something that made sense in retrospect. I was just so lost, and I'd spent over 10 years trying to find a way to help people that to me aligned with my values. And I was in Cambodia and I heard about this need for speech therapy. So there just are no speech therapists in the whole country. It is a problem that affects 1 in 25 people, and over 500,000 people need it, but not a single person can do it. And so I then decided that I had to start something. It wasn't really something I'd ever thought about doing, being the founder of a charity. And so this particular charity is starting the profession of speech therapy. But I guess the key difference is that it's doing it in a way to end its own cycle of dependency. It's going to shut down in 2030. And that's going to happen when we have 100 speech therapists integrated into the public sector, therefore under the government's support and supervision control. And by that stage, we'll have made the charity redundant, and hopefully the Cambodian society and the Cambodian government can continue this work for their own people.
Yeah, I think it's a good model for other charities as well, to continue that model. So let's just talk now about like starting a charity or a startup. That's what we're all about here. Learning from failures as well. And you talk about failures. You even say that you were a failed physiotherapist, and you talk about how being redundant isn't really, making a charity redundant isn't a failure at all. It's really a success. So our channel is all about failures, learning from them, failures becoming wisdom, and then leading to success as well. So how's your experience been in the startup world? And can you talk about some of the big failures that you've had along the way?
I mean, we've only got an hour, so I'm not sure how I'm going to get through all of these things.
Just start with the biggest ones.
I think if I was to put them to thematic form, like the most common failures I think are around having an idea of the solution, but it's not necessarily relevant to the problem. And I think this is from memory one of the most key reasons why startups fail, is because they create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And you can absolutely see how this happens, because you get so passionate about your thing and you try and force that onto the market if it's a private sector solution, of course,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
as a solution to people in poverty if you're a charity perhaps as well. So this is absolutely, it was always going to be a failure or a mistake. But I guess the key thing is how quickly you can recover from that, and how quickly you can make sure that you're not going down a path that's relevant for too long.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've managed to do with the different things I've been involved in, which means that they're still surviving.
So can you give us one solution that you came up with that wasn't relevant to the problem?
Yeah, definitely. So we haven't talked about Umbo, but Umbo is what I'm working on now for the last 6.5 years. So it's a online speech and occupational therapy. And the problem we're solving is the huge wait lists for allied health services, mostly in regional communities. So people are waiting 18 months to get basic and urgent services. You think about a 4-year-old child unable to go to school because they can't communicate well. Every week, every month that they wait is bad news for them, because without speech therapy or occupational therapy or other services, their window for improving is actually closing quite rapidly. Under 7 is a really important part in a child's development for them to get help.
Yeah.
And so 18 months is absolutely not, good enough, particularly in such a wealthy country. So what we do is we do online only. It's all through Zoom, and our therapists are based not only just around Australia, but also the world. We've got 20% of our therapists living overseas, for example. So this is what it's become. But initially, one of our first ideas was about building an online platform, which was a marketplace, to try and match the two together, and then to scale that massively with a huge amount of VC money to, achieve global domination. And very simply, what took us off that path was someone very wise asking us, saying to us, I'm not saying that this platform isn't necessary, but when do you think that you'll be clear that tech is your limiter to growth? At the moment, you're growing at a decent pace. So how do you know that the tech side of things is the thing that's stopping you from growing? And it was then that I kind of realized that, no, the thing that we're doing right now, which is essentially a services business, an online clinic, this is the thing. It always used to be the thing that we're going to do now to achieve that platform. And then eventually we just discarded that. And now this is the thing that we focus on.
Yeah, it's really interesting because so many startups have gone through that as well. People that I've interviewed on here, Dr. Sorry, just name doesn't come to me, but she's helping people with end of life care. And so, like platforms so they can register what their wishes are and all that sort of thing. And then she developed a platform for providers, but they just didn't take it on at all. And so many others. A good friend of mine, he developed an app, was for seniors, and they ended up, it didn't work, but they ended up realizing that same thing as well. They're more like a service-based type of startup as well. So, startups don't have to have global domination, and particularly those in the charity or social enterprises. They're doing a lot of good work, and they can be in smaller communities or larger communities, and it can be service-based. And so that scale-up model doesn't always work, particularly like in the platform sort of space as well. And going down the whole development path is another big story as well.
I think there's a big difference between what the business should be and what you think it should be. There's sort of two different things, because there's so much information out there now about what startups could be, let's say, and this idea that it has to scale, and this idea that it has to be tech-based, and it has to be, all of these things that it doesn't have to be effective, is really key to listen into that, and just to have your eyes open to the solution being right in front of your face.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes just the simple things that work. At the moment, I'm actually looking at setting up groups of founders getting together and trying to resolve problems with each other and having a bit of community. But I think it's a great idea, right? But I'm actually in the process of interviewing 50 to 100 founders and actually seeing if it's viable, if it's something that they want, and if it is, what sort of things do they want? how often they want to meet, what do they want to talk about, etc., etc. So I'm open to this. Could be totally, not work at all. I think it will. Like, I've interviewed about 20 people, and so far I've got really good feedback. But I think that's really important as well, to do that, market validation, or customer validation very well at the beginning, before you go, particularly start developing a platform or something. That's huge expense.
Yeah, and being open-minded, in your example there, being open to what the solution could be.
Yeah.
I think that's often very counter to the personality of a founder. A founder typically is someone who's very strong-willed and is supposed to have all the answers as well. They think they're supposed to, at least. So the approach that you're taking involves a lot of humility that's often counter to what founders feel like they need to be like.
Yeah, and I was that other founder before. So when I started my company, startup YesVR 6 years ago, I thought, VR, 360 VR training is just incredible. Everyone's going to love it. And to be honest, like, everyone that tried it did love it. But, I just thought, in 6 months, this thing's going to take off,
Yeah.
So, just because of all that experience and all the, so far, 40 people that I've interviewed, that's why I can now, be a bit more humble and say, may or may not work, so that's just the way it goes.
Maybe you need the failures or the things to go wrong to humble us. Maybe that's what we need. And I often think that sometimes there's a naivety that comes with founding things, but it needs to be there. For example, we're going to get paid in X number of years. We had the exact same thing with Umber. We're going to get paid in a couple of years. Initially, we thought, and then 5.5 years later, it happened. So would anyone start a business knowing that they're going to have 5.5 years of struggle? I don't think they would. No. So I think you have to be naive to start, and that's okay.
Yeah, I definitely was. And we went through 6 years not getting paid and spending a hell of a lot of money.
I see.
And, then we just said, that's it. And then we had some people come back to us and saying, look, we're interested now. It's like, what the hell's going on? Like, the best way to do sales is not to do anything, apparently. And then that sort of didn't work out. And then just this week, I told my co-founder, Diane, look, let's just close down the company. We don't need that expense. And so I went to an event, and then these two guys are like, you're in the VR space, we're doing videos, and we've got all these contacts. And so I did a demo, and so maybe it's on, it's going to be revived again. Who knows?
Phoenix rise from the ashes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, all right. So, tell us a little bit more about the charity space and your book as well. So, tell us more about what's that about and what you're trying to do with that.
Sure.
Book.
Let me grab the book. It's right behind me. So this is the book here. So it's called Redundant Charities. And I think the cover is really important, because the cover talks about the cycle of dependence that charities find themselves on. And I think there's two cycles. One of them is the charity itself on this dependency cycle to try and get more money and to justify its own existence that we described. But the second one is also the communities that the charity is supporting. They're on this cycle of dependence too, because the way that charities are set up, in which they are the vehicles to make the change, it doesn't ever empower the communities to do it for themselves. That's the long story short version. But I think if charities actually set end dates and exit strategies and shut down, then they're able to hand over their work to someone else and create a solution that's long lasting, and the charity's legacy is what's measured as success, as opposed to the 15-year time span that the charity's alive. Let's look at what happens when the charity shuts down, and then the thousands of years that happens after that. Charities are talking all the time about working themselves out of a job, and CEOs of charities will say, I want to see a world where we don't need to exist anymore. And then you kind of go, okay, what are you doing about that? What kind of time frame are you planning to achieve this ideal in? And like anything in life, it's great to have aspirations, but if you don't have a plan and a time frame, then it's just meaningless words.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's that expression? You can feed a man a fish, you teach him to fish, and then he's set for life, something or other.
That's right. Yeah.
Can't remember exactly, but that's the same sort of concept, isn't it?
It is. And I think the charities are, first of all, the book is very clear that this book is not having a go at people in charities, but
Yeah.
what we do see is the same kind of behavior over and over again, despite new people coming in and out. So what that seems to suggest is that there's something within the structure of charities that is preventing progress, that's preventing this power being handed over to communities. And then you have to look at that and say, well, how do we change the structure and incentives of the charities so that we can achieve something actually more meaningful than what we're doing at the moment?
Yeah.
And it's certainly not to say that what we're doing is useless or not helpful, because it absolutely is vital, these services that are being provided. But I guess the question that the book raises is there a way potentially to do it better? Is there a way that we can do the work with the limited resources that we have and have a bigger impact on people's lives?
Yeah, and I'm sure that 99% of all the workers in these organisations are really well motivated and doing the right thing. But there can be, like you said, they're doing a lot of good work, but things can still improve and there can be better outcomes ultimately than just still get funding, help. So teaching them how to fish is the best way to go about that.
And maybe there's a whole world where this type of idea doesn't make sense, and there's tons of charities that this kind of idea should be rejected potentially, and I'm absolutely open to that. And I think the main thing though with this book is starting a conversation. And when it comes to doing good as an area of our work, the level of critical thinking is relatively low. And I think that's because there's this underlying kind of vibe of, oh, well, we're doing good work, therefore give us a free pass, and let's not interrogate the work that we're doing and how we're going about doing it. And I think that's to the detriment. We need to have this critical discussion so that as a society we can move forward and progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with that. So, look, as we know, being an entrepreneur is not easy. What would you just say to somebody that wants to get into the social enterprise space or not-for-profit space? If they're just starting out, they've got a great idea that they think could really help a lot of people. What would you say to them? I don't really like asking for advice on this show, but what would you say to them? And also after that, we'll talk about funding as well, because that's a huge area, and that's one of the hardest things. In fact, in these groups these surveys I've been doing about forming these groups, sales and funding so far are the biggest points that are coming up that people have difficulty with.
Yeah. I think I could say many things, but I might boil it down to 3 top points. So the first one is to focus on a problem that other people aren't solving, or maybe they're solving, but there's a lot more room for new players. So there'll always be competitors, obviously, but I think going for the things that are in the social space, let's say the causes that are really being missed, of which there are so many, as opposed to your stock standard ones that everyone knows about. And by stock standard, I pretty much mean, for example, someone the other day asked me, what do I think about this charity where they send out lots of documents and letters written by kids and ask for fundraising support. And my response was, look, if they can afford to do that and mail this out to you and go through all that expense, maybe they don't need your money. So that's kind of like this rule of thumb type stuff that you can use. But so firstly, finding a problem that is really unique. I think the second one is really making sure that you're able to check your ego at various points. Particularly when it comes to the social impact space, so many founders out there say some really extraordinary things like, I want to solve this particular social issue for the rest of my life. And there's an example I use in the book of Tom's shoes, the buy one, give one model, where every time you purchase one in, let's say, Australia, they give one in Argentina. And the founder said, I want to solve this problem of shoes for the rest of my life. And the problem with that approach is that it means that people have to go without shoes for the rest of their life just to justify the ego of this founder. And it means that the problem has to stay current, and we're never actually going to solve it properly, because what's more important is that I'm actually solving it for my whole time on earth, which is obviously very short-sighted. And the third thing is, I think about co-founders, being able to find co-founders who cover for your weaknesses. So I've got like anyone, tons and tons of weaknesses.
Yeah.
There's no point me trying to turn a 3 out of 10 strength, i.e. a weakness, a 3 out of 10 into a 4 or 5 out of 10. I'm better off getting someone who's a 7 or 8 out of 10 in that area, and then making sure that they can get to a 9 or a 10. So co-founders are really important too.
Yeah. And so one of your co-founders, is that correct, is Piroshka, who I interviewed recently?
She's one of the early members, but she's not actually on paper a co-founder. She wasn't there at the beginning. But I have two co-founders, one who's sitting on the board and one who works with me day to day in a COO role. And the thing that particularly I'm thinking of Francesca, our COO, that she's excellent at is seeing risk. Not really my area. I'm a solutions-oriented person. So, every problem is an opportunity. And that's really great to have that kind of person, because nothing is beyond solving to me. But with that kind of mindset comes the inability to see risks when they come up, as well as Francesca does.
Yeah, I'm like you as well. A lot of co-founders, we're very big risk takers. I think you have to be to be a founder. But it's good to have somebody like that can pull you in. And my co-founder was definitely like that as well. I think sometimes you have the big vision people, and then you have the people that are more logical and, look after risks. So you need that balance. So
you need both, and you should expect conflict, and you should expect that you're not going to see eye to eye on lots of things. And that's perfectly okay. And that's why you're there, because if you agreed on everything and everything was dandy all the time, there's no point having two of you. You're exactly the same person.
Yeah, exactly. They do say that having a co-founder is like a marriage sometimes. I've actually interviewed some that were actually married.
Oh,
but it's like a marriage. Problems will come up, and you've got to resolve them. You've got to talk it out, and and so if you've got a good balance, like you said, if you're all the same, you're all like risk takers, how long is it going to last? I don't know.
That's
probably run out of money really quickly. And talking about money, that can be like a small problem for some startups.
Yes.
Like we were bootstrapped, and looking back, we probably would have been good at some stage to get some investment, particularly in the marketing sales area. But so for non-profits, you guys would be getting funding from different sources. Like, what is your experience like with that? And how difficult is it? And what's that journey like?
Yeah, well, firstly, the nonprofit that I started in Cambodia is not your typical, because of this idea that we are going to end at some point. It means that the measure of success is different to the standard nonprofit, and therefore the metrics we use to define success are different too. So, we talk about this idea, instead of saying, for example, how many kids have received speech therapy this year, which is very much your give a man a fish model that you mentioned, Paul. We say, how close are we getting to exit? How close are we getting to empowering the government to do this work, for example? So when you talk about it like that, the average funder just has no idea what you're talking about. And there's a big education piece there as well. And therefore, raising funds gets very challenging as well.
Yeah, even harder. It's hard enough as it is.
Absolutely. However, I think that there's a couple of benefits, though. First of all, it means that when you know the charity is going to end, you avoid this whole growth obsession, and you keep it small, and you keep it, keep it in check, let's say. So it'll be around for 17 years. So it's never going to go like this. It's just going to go up like this and then hopefully exit like this. So it means that you shouldn't need to raise as much as you would otherwise. I think the other thing is that when you're talking about this approach, which to me makes a lot of sense, you're going to exclude yourself from 97% of grants because they have criteria that doesn't suit. But the 3% of grants and 3% of people and volunteers and so on who really align and get it, they're going to come to you with a fervor and a passion that's much beyond what you would if you were just like everyone else.
And where do you find that 3%?
Very hard. I think you just got to talk to, you've got to talk to 1,000 and you'll find 30. Right. It's probably just a numbers game. But I do think, again, if you put the energy out there, it's very much like this book, that I'm sure there's a whole bunch of people that are completely upset or disagreeing with the approach. I just wouldn't hear about it. However, I have heard a lot of really great feedback from people contacting me to say, this is everything that I've been looking for. The answers that I've been looking for are here. And it's made me really rethink all of our work. And so I guess, without trying to sound too woo-woo, when you put the energy out there, something will return.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, you get really passionate people, I guess, that like I can really relate to what you're doing as well. I'm not in the charity space, but I think it's just something really honest and real, and so I know in one of your talks you were saying that when you're working in China, you just didn't feel really right in yourself, because of the way things were going. And I think a lot of people, work for organizations and maybe what they're doing is okay, but it's not really. And then you don't, it's hard to get passionate about something like that, unless you really, really believe in it.
In which case, why should we do it anyway? For me personally, I've always wanted to work in social impact. And of course, there's a huge amount of sacrifice that goes with that because it's not as stable as, for example, a corporate job. And so I always think that if I'm going to make this leap from stability to instability, let's say, for want of a better phrase, I might as well do something where my heart's 100% in it. Otherwise, I'll just do the job that I don't really want to do, but it's more stable.
Yeah, and it must give a huge amount of self-satisfaction to work in that sort of area and something that you're so passionate about.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. As opposed to so many people in corporate say do their, well, I was going to say 9 to 5. It's more like 7 to 11 in some cases
these days.
They're exhausted, and they might be making a really good income, but are they really happy? So
what's really interesting about this topic though, and it's something I've only realized just recently, is that yes, working for a particular cause is really important. Absolutely, it's motivating, and that's the thing that gets you out of bed, but it doesn't keep you getting out of bed, I've realized. So what I mean is people get burnt out on the cause. And if you talk to people who work in nonprofits, very often there's a huge amount of burnout, and a lot of the cultures are quite toxic. So what actually does keep you going day to day and year on year? And I've realized it's not the cause, it's actually the people you work with. It's working with brilliant people like Proshka that you spoke to, and our amazing team at Umbo, where we've just created this environment where we attract incredible people, and you see them going above and beyond and supporting each other and really, displaying amazing empathy and compassion. That to me is the thing that motivates eventually. It's not the cause.
Well, that's really, really interesting. And I'm really surprised that there's toxic cultures going on in that space. It's like,
definitely,
what's happening with that? Like, they're trying to do something good, and then within the organization, I mean, I've experienced toxic cultures before. I've actually experienced bullying in a government organization, but I wouldn't expect that in a not-for-profit.
You should spend a bit of time on Glassdoor. I'm sure you know Glassdoor. Okay. Yeah, look up some charities that are relatively well known, because they would have reviews, for example. But I think it's just, it doesn't make sense. I agree, because we're supposed to be kind and we're supposed to be empathetic, but often they don't treat their own people that well.
Gee, that's surprising, but not very good. But I totally agree with you about culture and your team as well. And Diane and I, because we came both from that organisation where there's a lot of issues, we experienced that. So we really focused on really having a good culture, really looking after people. And we had the same thing. We had all the team members, didn't need any supervision at all. They worked so hard for us. They believe in what we're doing, and it was really, and that was like the startup journey is really brutal and hard. But that element is what kept me sane as well, and why I can look back and say, I really enjoyed that journey because of the people, So can totally relate to that. Okay, so let's just go back to 10-year-old Wei and talk about when you're in the classroom and your teacher asks you something, and that's how that sparked everything within you, your journey, so to speak. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you're referring to a particular story that I've told in the past, but in general, I think 10-year-old Wei was very obedient, extremely obedient, and very much a follower, and very much someone who would didn't have dreams of his own. and would just sort of, try and essentially live someone else's life.
Right.
And I think also to my defense, growing up in the 80s and 90s in Australia, it's a very different time back then,
Yeah.
because even from a cultural perspective, you don't proudly show your cultural heritage in Australia at that time. You sort of, we all had to basically like beer, like cricket, like footy, like meat pies, all the things that I do happen to like anyway, which is perfectly fine. But there was no other part of me that I could show authentically as well. Of course, these days it's completely different, and it's wonderful to see celebrations of Diwali and so forth in schools. So yeah, I think that's what 10-year-old Wei was like, and it went far beyond that until probably around my 20s, when I started to have more critical thinking and thought about the world and what it is that I wanted to do. It was always there. And I think to my parents' credit, they always encouraged independent thinking, but I don't think that 10-year-old Wei had the courage or insight to be able to exercise it.
Well, the story I was actually referring to is when your teacher asked you to help a little boy that had some difficulties.
Sorry. Yeah. I was actually 5. So it was kindergarten. That's why I got confused.
Oh,
it's a kindergarten.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, all right. So as you can tell, I tell a lot of stories. I forget a lot of them too. But that one refers to, so my first day in school. Yeah, as a 5-year-old boy, and I sat next to this boy called Roger. And Roger was colorblind. And because of that, my teacher said, you've got to help him with coloring in. Coloring in is a very big component of your work in kindergarten. It's about 90% of it. So I had the opportunity to help him, and it was very simple. He'd say, I need to color the sky. Can you pass me a blue pencil? And I'd do it in grass green. And what I learned at the young age of 5 was that not everyone's like me, and they all have different abilities, and sometimes just a little bit of help someone to integrate fully into the work that we're doing. And I'm blessed that this happened to me at that age, because it forced those lessons upon me. However, a lot of other communities, a lot of other countries don't have this experience, because the services to get people with disabilities integrated don't exist.
No. So that spark, that, helping little Roger first day of kindergarten has sparked you, to do all this amazing work and help so many people, and like huge amount of people. It doesn't matter like the amount, I guess, but you've done really, really helpful work and set up so many charities and companies that, still, as you said, going on, and even without you there, will eventually be redundant because they've helped so many people, and they'll be able to do what they need to do. So, it's been great having you on the show. But just before we go, it's one question I ask sometimes. And you've been on TED Talks, you've been on a lot of stuff, right? But what's a question no one's ever asked you, but you wish they would have asked you?
Ooh. Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I mean, because I guess we talk a lot about our beginnings, but you just sparked this thought about the end. What sitting on your deathbed type scenario.
Right.
What let's turn it the other way around. So rather than things you have achieved, what are the regrets that you don't want to have? Maybe.
Okay.
So what regrets would you like to avoid? And there's a beautiful book called Regrets of the Dying, I think it's called, written by an Australian palliative care nurse. And she runs through the top regrets that people have. And that sparked a bit of thought in me as well.
Okay. And so what are some of the top regrets
I think
you'd like to avoid?
Yeah, I think it's things like, well, this is a very common one, not spending enough time with your family. Prioritizing the family is really important. I think living my life rather than someone else's, living my truth rather than someone else's, having the courage to do that. These are the sort of things I don't want to avoid. And I think speaking up for people and using my privilege when I have it in my power to speak up for people and giving them the power to speak for themselves. I think to me that's really important too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like, fantastic. Really, really appreciate you coming on the show today, and I love the work you're doing, and wish you more success than you've already had. And
Thanks,
I guess success for you is helping others, and having people be able to speak up for themselves and I guess it'd be great for more people to have the courage that you do to go out there and help others in the world. And so, wishing you every success in all those areas.
Thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Startup Fail Wisdom podcast. In this episode, Wei Yeoh shared some crucial insights on how to make your startup self-sustaining, why adapting quickly can prevent burnout, and the importance of collaboration for building a resilient, balanced team. These lessons are designed to help you sidestep the stress and exhaustion that lead many founders to burnout. Next week, I'll be speaking to Leo Plaza, an entrepreneur who has faced and conquered multiple startup challenges. Leo will share how he avoided the burnout traps that many founders fall into and his strategies for staying resilient when the pressure is on. If you're struggling with the grind of startup life, this episode will give you practical tips to protect your energy and keep pushing forward. You won't want to miss it. Subscribe and join us next week for another deep dive into the realities of startup life.